Hey, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. Dave with you yet again. Hope you're doing great. Hope your podcasts are doing well and your plans. It's fall, y'all. It's now like October when I'm recording this almost. And it's exciting because October is my anniversary month. Ta-da! 31 years this year with my wife, Jen. Talk about a patient person. Oh, Lord. I love fall here in Canada, all the leaves changing colors and all of that. So if you're listening somewhere where your leaves don't change color, or it's a different time of the year totally, we get a little excited around fall. We don't like what comes after fall with snow in Canada. That part we're not as big of a fan of, but right now it's beautiful. So you can go outside in the evening and there's no bugs, and it's a lot nicer to kind of be out there in the world. We're back, and I actually had a client call recently. I'm helping somebody start their podcast. They came to me, and this was their very first question. They had already done all the purchases. They bought a microphone. They did all that stuff, which is great. I'm glad that they have that. But the one thing they didn't know was what to talk about on a podcast. Like, what should my show be about? Like, I'm not a content creator. I'm not a coach. I don't have a book. I have nothing to put out in the world as far as what I've done before my podcast started. But I really want to be a podcaster. So I'm all in. Like, I really want to do this, and I'm excited to be a part of the podcast world. But I just don't know where to start. Like, where's the gaps? That was the question I was asked, Dave. Where are the gaps in podcasting today so that I could start my show and create something that's maybe different or serves an audience that's underserved in podcasting? And I really want to do that. I just don't know where to start. Like, where would you suggest, Dave, for somebody net new to podcasting and has no idea where to begin? So I would first say, if you're listening to this and you haven't bought microphones and gear and all that, to wait on that, because that's a pretty significant investment for many people. So before you go buy all that stuff, maybe do this episode first as a starting point, and then figure out what you need and what you want to spend and how much money you want to invest. That's a totally different thing. And one thing you'll notice on the How to Podcast series, it's not like a podcast about microphones. It's not a podcast about all these technology and tools. Actually, somebody called me out. They're like, Dave, why do you never talk about this stuff? Well, I use a $50 microphone I bought on Amazon that plugs into my computer and a set of $15 headphones, and I've been doing over 2,000 episodes with that. So technology for me is boring, and it's something I don't really get into because I find it's not as helpful to talk about the gear that we have. It's more helpful to talk about the content, because the one thing I know is my listeners don't care what microphone I have or what type of headphones I have. They're showing up because they love my show and they want to listen to the next episode, right? So that's kind of my take on technology, and that's why you don't hear a lot about that here on the show, because I really don't think it adds a lot of value. I'm happy to help you if you have questions, but to create episodes after episodes to talk about this mic versus that mic and this thing versus that thing, I personally don't listen to those episodes because they don't bring me any value. $50, Amazon, you get it like in a day or two, plug it in, off you go. Right? Yeah. Okay. So let's move forward from that. So beyond podcasts about technology or podcasts about podcasting that keep people out of podcasting for some reason, there's two things I think I'm seeing as a gap in podcasting from a content perspective and an underserved audience perspective that you could jump on as a new podcaster. And I want to share them with you to maybe give you a spark about maybe your new show, or maybe new content for your show, or maybe a pivot for your show if you're not growing, or you're just bored of your content and you want to move forward with something new. There's two things that we need in podcasting that I think will make you stand out, obviously based on content, but also because of you and your take on these two topics. So are you curious? Well, you're still here listening, so you must be. Thanks for listening. Are you ready? Here we go. So we have true crime podcasts. We have podcasts about, building your business. We have mental health podcasts. We have physical health podcasts. We have comedy podcasts. We have famous people doing podcasts. We have all these different types of podcasts, right? Where's the gaps, Dave? That was the question I was asked by one of my clients. And we talked through this, and I thought, well, instead of just having it as a one-off conversation with one amazing new podcaster, I'd rather also then include you in this. And I brought up 2 underserved areas of podcasting as far as content creation and focus that I think that if you're a new podcaster and you don't know what to talk about, or you don't know what your show should be about, these 2 things could be an option for you to consider for your podcast in the future, or a new show, or whatever you're going to do. 2 things. The first one, hyper-local podcast, like super local to your area, your community. That's number 1. Number 2, not in order of preference, but just as a second, would be a podcast for the generation currently as of October 2024. Any podcast that focuses on a listenership of adults from 50 years of age and over. Because I think we're underserved, and I'm in that area. I think we're underserved from a content perspective and a voice for our generation and our age group. So there's 2, hyperlocal and anything for somebody over 50. Those are the 2 things that I think we need in podcasting as a brief overview. And now I'm going to get deeper into both. Okay, here we go. So why hyperlocal podcasts? Focused on a hyperlocal location, something in your area, where you live, your community. There's something special about where you live. And what's happened is there's a vacuum effect that's happened. If you turn on your local radio station, you turn on your local news on television, if you still watch TV, the newspapers, right? All of that local identity in media that's been there for years and years has been sucked out of our communities. Let's talk radio, for example. Do you believe that your local radio host that does the morning drive or your afternoons or your evenings or weekends manning the radio station or overnights, do you believe that all of those people actually live in your community? That all those people are actual people that know your street address or your local diner or that favorite coffee shop? Do you realize that in some cases, those radio personalities are being kind of pumped into your local community, but they don't even live in your city, your state, your province, maybe even your country? They don't even live where you live. So they're not local at all. And in that sense, they're not a voice of your community because they don't live where you live. They don't know about the traffic jams that happen at this street and that street. They don't know about that pothole that's downtown. They don't know about the local community group or food bank. They've never been there because they don't live there. They live somewhere else, and their content is brought to you and made it seem like and sound like they actually live in your community, but they don't. Because radio's cut back on staff. Radio automates. Radio brings in other things. My local radio station has proudly switched to an AI voice who says, this is whatever, Amanda, your AI voice on the radio station, blah, blah, blah.fm. And here's the next song. 2 Tickets to Paradise by Any Money. And it's like, they don't even hide it. They just tell you this is an AI voice. Wow. So our radio stations have been, the identity of our community has been sucked out of many of our radio stations. And if you do have a local radio station and a local radio host, then love them and support them and do your best to promote them because we want more local. But I see in podcasting an opportunity, a huge gaping hole where a lot of people don't think about a local, hyper-local podcast because they think they have to be everything to everyone and everywhere. You don't. You can be very successful in your local community as a voice of your community and focus on your community. You could have 100,000 people who live in your city. You could have 5,000 people who live in your town. Why not be the voice of your community and have the potential of 5,000 listeners who all live in your community know about your show? Isn't that a success? I would think that would be quite successful to have your local community represented in a podcast. Who cares if somebody on the other side of the planet listens or not? That's not the purpose of your show. A hyper-local podcast can capture community. You could be at community events. You could be at vendor fairs and the farmer's market and a new store opening, or talking about Mr. Jones's appliance repair center as a sponsor of your show. There are so many opportunities for a hyper-local podcast that I think you haven't even thought about yet. So if you don't even know what to talk about on your show, have you considered a hyper-local podcast? Think about the local government decisions that are having an impact on your community. You could get on and talk about these things. You could talk about upcoming community events and festivals and be a promoter of those events. Get free passes to a concert or a show or a special event in your community because you're the voice of your in your podcast, the voice of the community. You could profile local businesses and entrepreneurs starting out, or people doing great things, charities in your community. What about historical stories about a building, the downtown, an old building in your community? Like, you could be someone who elevates and magnifies your community just through your podcast. So community-focused content helps you to create content that directly addresses local issues, events, personalities, and you can cover these great topics. You can also collaborate with local services and companies and businesses and community members within your community. Partner with local organizations to enhance content and reach. You could interview local officials. I interviewed the mayor on my podcast, for example, of my city. You could feature local artists and musicians and authors, creative people in your space who don't really have a voice in your community. You could be the person to promote them. You could promote collaborations with schools or educational segments and teachers and the principal and the local sports events for football or baseball or hockey that have happened in your community. You could be there on the field. You could be there at the ice rink. You could be the voice of your community talking about these great social events and sporting events. You could work with the local sports teams and promote what's coming up in the future. You could be the voice of people driving to that next sporting event, that next festival, listening to you, giving out promotional codes or discount codes or giving away seats to a sporting event. You could get all of these things and you could be the voice of your community. It's a great place to start as a podcaster. As you're trying to figure this whole podcasting thing out, be the voice of your community. What about interactive elements? Maybe engage with your community directly through hosting live recordings at an event, at a festival, at a farmer's market, or a craft show, a sponsorship for your local humane society where they're trying to adopt pets. You could be the voice of the event just by being a podcaster. You can encourage listener submissions of local stories or questions. You could become a voice at city town halls and all of that. You have so many opportunities as a podcaster, and there's really not a lot of expense to do this. You could be the voice of your town. Create a community forum or a discussion on podcast topics or ideas for future shows. I see a huge gap in hyper-local podcasting. We always think that we have to be, like I said, we have to be everything for everyone. And I need a show that's going to reach Africa and China and Mexico and US and Canada and Russia and England. And I got to be everywhere. But what if you focused on a local podcast? I think there's a huge win and opportunity. And the idea being narrow focused, focusing on one community and doing your best for them, I think is a huge missed opportunity in podcasting. And if anybody comes to me and says, Dave, I have no idea what to talk about on my show or what my show should be about, one of the first things I'm going to suggest is tell me about where you live. A great example for you. In a podcast that I haven't started yet, so if you want to steal it, steal it. But I want to do this show somehow. I live near Niagara Falls, like the Niagara Falls that people travel the world to come see. Like, I know places here in Niagara Falls that you will never see on any type of tourist map, or it's like little tucked away little restaurants and coffee shops and sightseeing things and things that you would never know to go see. I know great people that have like a bed and breakfast or an inn, or you want to get away from the traditional hotel. I can send you places to people that you would love to meet. I could help you have an amazing stay or visit in Niagara Falls with a hyper-local podcast focused on Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada. There could be one for Niagara Falls, US. I could create a podcast today, and I could have constant episodes. Things are always happening here. I could partner with wedding photographers. I could partner with hotels. I could partner with restaurants, coffee shops, tourist locations, on and on and on. Authors who live in Niagara Falls, musicians who live here. I could talk to the mayor. I could talk about events that are coming up in the future. There's unlimited content just by where I live. And I live here. It doesn't cost me anything. And I can benefit from free tickets and free passes and free hotel stays. I could get VIP tickets to concerts. I have unlimited access to my community, and no one's doing this podcast. Nobody. As well, I can also then kind of tailor my content to people who don't just want to visit Niagara Falls, but they want to move here. I could partner with real estate agents and home improvement places, and maybe you need an electrician or a plumber or any of that, and you want to move here. I can help you to understand the real estate market in Niagara Falls. Where's a good place to buy? Where's a good neighborhood? Who should I contact to move here? And I could teach you about Niagara Falls all on the same show for tourists and for locals. My podcast could be all hyper local, and I don't need to be listened to in another place. I don't need to reach another audience. I need to reach the audience that's right here in front of me. Hyper local is where it's at. So if you have no idea where you should podcast about, or where, or your content, or where should I even start, I want you to consider a hyper-local podcast. Really, I think it's a great opportunity for you as a new podcaster, or as a podcaster that wants to do another show, or you're tired of your current show, you want to make a change or a pivot, or you just want to add elements of hyper-local podcast into your show. It might be a huge way to grow your podcast. Hyper-local, everyone. It's super important. There's a vacuum. There's less news reporters. There's less radio. There's less television coverage for your community. All of these different avenues have left. And what's left? You. You can easily step into this and fill the gap and be the voice of your community. Be a superstar promoting where you live and see what happens. I think you'll be quite excited when people start calling you up saying, hey, podcast so-and-so, I would love for you to come and cover our convention or concert or event. We would love to have you there as the voice of our community. It's your turn. There you go. You just got yourself a free idea for a podcast. And this is what I covered with my client. So they're actually considering this. But there's another type of podcast that's underserved right now in this world of podcasting that I think anybody can do anywhere in the world. It's not hyper-local, but it's very important. And I think it's a huge gap that you could fill today, right now, as a podcaster. You ready for this? So beyond hyper-local podcasts, which I'm totally in love with, and I think you should try today. If I had more time, I would add my 9th podcast to my list and start that today. But my wife said no. So I have to kind of wait and see. Maybe I might renegotiate what I have. And I'm in negotiations with my wife around podcast number 9. And it'll be hyper-local. I'm going to love it. Anyway, so if you want to steal my idea before me, go ahead. There's another type of podcast that I think is underserved right now. As our population gets older and families are having less children, there's this highly weighted average of listeners that are not being served today in podcasting. And who are they? They're people just like me who are over 50 at that stage of their life. Maybe their kids are gone. Maybe they're empty nesters. Maybe they are semi-retired or thinking about the end of their career. They're making plans for the future. They're maybe a new grandparent. They're going through menopause. There's a lot of different things going on for our generation. There's health concerns. There's a lot of stuff going on for people who are over 50. And what I notice when I look at my stats and when I talk to other podcasters, that age group doesn't seem to represent strongly in our statistics, in our analytics. We see a lot of people in their 20s, 1820s, 30s, 40s. But when you get to the 50s, that number seems to fall off because maybe our content doesn't really reach them. Our content doesn't really speak to somebody who's over 50. So there's a gap here then. That means there's an opportunity for you. If you don't know what to talk about and you're kind of my age or you want to address people my age, you could easily step into a content gap, this big hole that's there that nobody seems to go to and nobody's filling. It's that pothole that you hit on the way to work every day. It's like, can't somebody fix this pothole? There's a pothole in podcasting and it's called Podcasts for People Over 50. And there's a huge opportunity for you. So if you don't know where to podcast, I would really like for you to consider starting a show or having content in your show for somebody who's over 50 years of age. It might take a lot of work for you if you're not our age. You might have to understand us or ask us questions or figure out what's going on in our world. But there's a huge gap in podcasting for people over 50. And you could fill this. You could fix this today by starting a show for us. I would love to listen to your show. So please, make a show for somebody over 50. And here's why. Age-related topics that need to be covered in our generation, our who we are as people, we need these. We need somebody to come on and talk about health and wellness for older adults. We need somebody to help us with financial planning and retirement strategies for us, for our family, for our kids. My wife and I are buying rental properties for our children so that they can inherit what we've done today. After we're long gone, they're going to be set up for success. So we need somebody to come on and talk about that. What about travel tips for seniors? Where can we go that's not going to be exhausting? Where we can't walk for 40, 50 miles? No, we need something close, easy, comfortable, something that's an easy trip for us. Because we're not 25 anymore. Our bodies remind us of that every morning. We need great travel tips for people our age and technology guidance for people over 50. There's so much happening in the world right now with AI and tools. And I see people just freaking out my age going, I don't understand any of this. And nobody explains it to me in terms that somebody who was born in 1969 or 1970 or whatever, we don't understand what you're talking about. So can you dumb it down for us so that we're not afraid of what's happening in technology? You guys need to slow it down a little bit so we understand. We need health and wellness for adults our age, financial planning, travel tips, technology guidance. Why? Because it's happening to us and we don't understand what's happening and we need your help. I went through a checkout with my wife in Calgary at a podcast conference and the woman behind the cash looked at us and said, oh, you guys qualify for our seniors discount. Now, it's only 5%, but that's the first time anyone's ever told me I'm a senior. It's probably my gray hair, which is something I have, and I don't really want to paint it, but it's gray, so I'm obviously an old man, and I'm a grandfather, so yeah, I know. But that's the first time someone's ever called me out on that and gave me a discount. Oh, well. I did say 5%, which I was happy. We're at this stage as 50-plus adults. A life stage specific content is something that we need in our shows, in our podcasting. I need you as a podcaster to address the unique experience of my age group. Navigating relationships as empty nesters. There's a podcast right there. The whole thing could be just around empty nesters. What about career transitions and encore careers? How about that? We've done on this whole job our whole life. Now we switch. We start something else. It's our second act. It's our next thing. It's whatever we're up to next. Our next chapter. What about grandparenting advice for new grandparents? I could go buy a book, but I'd much rather listen to your podcast. What about aging gracefully and staying active in our 50s There's a great podcast right there. These are all podcast ideas for you. So if you're stuck and you're not sure what to podcast about, the podcasting space for people over 50 is just ripe for a new podcaster like you to get in here and answer these questions and create a show. What about the nostalgic elements for people my age? Incorporate content that appeals to a shared generational experience, like retrospectives on significant historical events or music or movies or TV from when I was a kid. Discussion around classic films, music, and pop culture from when I was here, when I was a kid. How about interviews with icons from my youth, people that I admire, that I look up to, the movie stars, the musicians, the authors that were there writing when I was a kid. That's an amazing opportunity for me to fall in love with your content. If you can connect me with somebody that I admire, I look up to, I'm in. Now, so we've talked about the gap that's there for hyper-local podcasts. We've talked about the gap for people that are over 50. But what about a strategy of combining both? Oh, talk about a double whammy. That's a thing? Yeah, a double whammy in podcasting. Combining hyper-local and over 50. Oh, that's a home run. So how do we do this? How do we combine a hyper-local podcast with a podcast geared to people over 50? Well, a few things to consider. First of all, make it accessible in the format. Now, what's the most accessible for somebody over 50? Audio. Now, I know there's a lot of video, and I love video. I watch video. But the most accessible format for somebody over 50 who's active and driving and going to work and whatever is audio, because you don't have to look at the screen. I can be doing something else. I could be gardening. Okay? I could be painting, which I've done a lot of lately. I could be busy doing something else and I can have you in my ears. Audio is great for that. So that's probably the most accessible format right now. But when you're communicating with somebody over 50 around a hyperlocal podcast, provide clear instructions for accessing the podcast on various platforms. So I love episodes.fm. I love Podlink. These are ways for people to find your show or have a shareable show. Also, there's a way in Adobe, you can create a QR code. Now, not all people over 50 will understand what a QR code is, but they can point their phone, which most of us have, at this QR code, and it'll take us directly to your show. That makes it super easy. So make it easy for us, please. Please make it easy. Okay? Create user-friendly website. If you can do transcriptions, that's even better on your podcast. Also offer multiple ways to listen. Streaming, downloading. You can use YouTube. I use the static image, just the picture with the audio attached on YouTube. I just want to be everywhere that people can find me. So make it easy for us in format. But also then use cross-platform promotion for your podcast. If you want to reach more potential listeners for your new show, then use a variety of channels. You could advertise in a local newspaper if you have one. We don't always. You can advertise in a local newspaper or on a community bulletin boards. You can talk about your hyper-local podcast where people go, the local coffee shop where we all gather and have our morning coffee. Tim Hortons, right? We're there. Somehow get your name in front of people. Utilize social media platforms, popular with people that are over 50, which would probably be Facebook for the most part. Maybe partner with local radio shows if they are still local and they are taking this as a way to cross-promote each other, to help you become the voice of your community to people over 50. And then the other thing you could do, and I really love this, is guest experts and storytellers. Bring in voices that resonate with your target audience, whether it be local or 50 plus or both. Local historians and long-time residents really help with the hyper-local side of it and identifying with people our age, over 50. Experts in aging and retirement, senior health for the age 50 plus is something that we need in podcasting. So the big thing here altogether, just tailor your content for the specific audiences and employ some targeted promotion around your podcast. podcasters can be effectively filling these huge content gaps that are appearing right now in our space. And you could serve these people that are underrepresented, that are eager to be part of something new. Podcasting is all about community. And your podcast could help reinforce where you live and or reinforce the generation of people over 50 who are not really listening to podcasts as much as younger generations are. They may not understand it. They're going to need help and a little hand-holding to understand and get to the point where they can participate. So if you're a patient person, if you're a patient podcaster and you don't mind explaining it in a way that makes sense to people who don't get it, as naturally as somebody younger, more adept to technology and their phones and all of that stuff, if you can explain it in simple terms and then be out into the community, whether that's people who are over 50 or in your local, hyper-local community podcast, you have an unlimited potential to reach an audience that's not being reached right now effectively. There's my starting point for you. So if you're like, Dave, I don't know where to start in my podcast, my advice for you today, create a hyper-local podcast. Focus on your community, whether you have 500 people in your town or you live in a city of 400,000. You have unlimited potential to reach this content, to reach these people, and people will listen to your show outside of your community because maybe they've moved away and they're missing home. Maybe they're thinking of moving to your community. You could be the voice that welcomes them to this place. Hyperlocal is where it's at. That's number one. I would focus on that as a starting point. And if that's not your game, that's not what you're interested in, then focus on people over 50. There's a huge gap. We need your podcast. We need you to create a show for people over 50 to bring more people in this age group into podcasting as active listeners. Anything that we can do to grow the community of podcasting in general terms, not just for your show, but for all podcasters, to bring more people to the platform and more people to this, the better. So consider hyperlocal, podcasts for people over 50, and if you can combine them both into one, what a win-win situation. If you have any questions about your podcast, you want to learn how to podcast, you're having trouble getting started, you're having trouble learning how to grow your show, and you're like, Dave, thanks for the episodes, thank you for all you do in Hot Podcast Series, but I'd just love to talk to you because I just have ideas and questions and I don't feel like I'm getting good answers. I don't know where to start. I don't know where to go. In the show notes for today is a link that's there for you. It's a calendar link directly with me, only for listeners, where you and I can get together. I'm not going to sell you anything. I have nothing to sell you. I'm just here to answer any questions you have. You can use the link as often as you want. It's free. It doesn't cost you a penny. And you and I can get together over Zoom. We can meet each other. I'm going to ask you some questions about the podcast and how I can serve you better. But I'm there to serve you. I'm there to answer any questions that you have about this show, about your show, about podcasting in general. There's no dumb question, and I'd love to help you. Okay? I would love to help you. It gives me a chance to talk to somebody who listens to the show. You're here still listening. Thank you. I want to connect with you. So this link is only available in the show notes, and you can see that on your phone. If you scroll up, it'll be there at the very bottom of the page on your phone. Click the link. Come in, let's meet together. I'd love to chat with you anytime. Please. Thanks for being part of the podcast. And again, if you don't know where to start, hyperlocal or a podcast for somebody over 50 focused on our unique needs. It's a great place to start. It's not crowded. There's not a lot of shows like it. And you don't have to compete with everybody else. That's my first starting point, I would say. And that's what I shared with my client. And if you need help, let me know. howtopodcast.ca. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of the show. And thanks for listening to the very end. You are amazing. Take care. So you're a podcaster and you podcast alone. You are in your home. You're in your studio. You're in your closet. And you podcast. And you put everything out there in the world and you're thinking, man, I'd love to meet another podcaster and not feel so alone. I wish there was a way to meet up with other podcasters and talk about my journey, ask my questions in a safe place where others there are also podcasters at different levels. Some people have been doing this a long time. Maybe some podcasters are brand new like me. And I'd love to be able to ask questions and do community with others. Maybe find a guest for my show or be a guest and ask a question that's bothering me about podcasting that I haven't seen or already got an answer to. I wish there was a group for me. Dave, do you know of a group where they do all of that and they do group hugs, virtual group hugs? Yeah, we do. It's our meetup. And you know, guess what? You're invited to come to our meetups. They are amazing. Not because of me by any stretch of imagination. It's because they're great because of the people who show up. You're going to meet some of the nicest podcasters you've ever met. There's no judgment. There's no talking down to you. It's not about me. It's about the group. And there's many times where I don't even have to talk. Each of the people coming bring great expertise and insights that can help you grow your show, to help you be a better person. And they're there to support you. It's our meetups, and you can find them at our howtopodcast.ca website. Come join us. There's over 200 people in our group, and we'd love to have you there. Lots of room for you. Come be a part of our meetups and meet other podcasters. Don't do it alone. Podcasting should never be done alone. Come join us. howtopodcast.ca. See you at our meetups.